Dear esteemed viewers of Civic Space TV, welcome to yet another edition of this show, the Citizens Chat Show. I have with me a panel of distinguished gentlemen, and we are going to look at the recently held elections in Kayunga, the by-election for LC5 that is, and all the drama that characterized it. Then we shall look at the strike that has now become part and parcel of the medical world in Uganda. So those are going to be our main discussions for today. So before we go any further, allow me to introduce my panel, starting with Mr. Herbert Luswata, who is the Secretary General of Uganda Medical Association. Mr. Herbert is making his maiden appearance, and we're happy to have him here.
Yeah, thank you so
Next
much.
to him is Mr. Joseph Ochieno, a UPC ideologue, yeah, and who has also joined us to make a contribution to the discussion we have. And then finally, Mr. K.Katana Benjamin, who is a lawyer with the National Unity Platform, also joined us for this discussion, and he is also here with us.
It's a great pleasure.
Okay, without any further ado, let's begin with the medics strike. And I'm going to bring in Mr. Luswata. Mr. Luswata, these strikes have been recurrent. Yeah. In fact, there are so many strikes that are recurrent in this government, in this country. Makerere strikes are almost every year or every semester. We have the teachers threatening to strike or striking, and then the medics and their strike. So, from your perspective and as an organization, do you think this is now the final solution to the medic strikes? Are we not going to wake up next year or even later before this year ends and hear that there's another strike coming from your side of the aisle?
Okay, thank you so much. The name is Dr. Herbert Luswata.
Yes.
Now, the issue of strikes in Uganda, I think the government has set the precedence. Okay, some scholars will tell you that probably because NRM came in power by force, and maybe because they were denied, they lost elections and badly, and then they had to use force to come into power. It has become almost normal to them that every person they have to give attention has to use their means, which is really very wrong. When it comes to the side of the medics, it is really very unfortunate, because during our training as doctors and even other health workers, we have ethics, and there's a way we're supposed to conduct ourselves. In that, in your training, you see that there is not even any chance whereby you would even think about going on the street to march. There is no way you would even think about ever look up to your boss and you say, I'm not going to do this until you do that. In our training, you never see such a thing happening. But the situation and the circumstances in Uganda have actually forced us to breach some of our ethical guidelines, to breach some of the things which we are taught in the universities when we are coming up as doctors, and we said, no, enough is enough, because you realize that if you stick to the script of what you're supposed to be as a doctor, then you are going to lose out on very many things. You are oppressed to the extent that you may end up running away from your own country, which is really absurd. So the issue of strikes in Uganda, it is the mother of all this is the government itself. They have been here for 30 years. Ideally, by this time, would be having very good platforms for dialogue and negotiations with the public. But these things are not there. Usually, they are reactionary. When someone comes up with an issue that maybe this is not right, they just want to react. Sometimes they even abuse openly, even in media. You wonder, a 4 minister coming up and tell doctors that they're immature. Then you wonder, how can a doctor even be immature? And this is a minister in a very big position, very respectable. So these things it is the government actually causing all this. And I can't blame this on any Ugandan who will come out and strike. It is the operation of government which has developed all this that is happening.
Okay. And then with the agreement you have now with government that you're going back to work and they're meeting their part of the bargain, do you have faith in that? Do you think that this is now the solution? Or you also think that maybe let's see how it goes and we could respond to it along the way?
And now we had to push government into a corner somehow, and we had to take some steps to help us to have better, maybe leverage next time when we are supposed to come out. When we were launching the strike, actually, as UMA, I said it on camera myself that we do not want any negotiations, no more paperwork. We want cash on accounts. And we meant that because we had received many signed documents before for a long time, and these things have never been fulfilled. I mean, at some point, I was actually asking someone that what does the presidential directive mean in Uganda?
Okay.
How is it different in America? Can a president of America give a directive and it takes over 5 years without being implemented? And this other thought also came in that maybe our president sometimes plays some games that he can give you with the right hand and then takes away with the left hand. Because why would the fountain of honor give a directive and then someone in the lower office can actually breach it easily and they walk out with it? So there was a lot of contention, and this time around we realized that surely if you want something, then we must get it before we go back to work. Now, the reason why we decided to call off the strike, there is this variant of Omicron which is coming. It was a big threat because apparently we are managing emergencies. But when you get a pandemic coming in, everything becomes an emergency. In fact, even when you go back, if Omicron hits us very well, even when you go back, we shall still not be enough because we are few in the health sector who are really practicing. Then the other issue is the meeting we had at Ministry of Health. We had a very long meeting. It took almost the whole day. In negotiations, to the extent that they had to transfer money on that same day. I don't know how it happened and drop it on the accounts of Ministry of Health because we failed to agree completely. Now, when the money came and they gave us evidence that the money was on the accounts of Ministry of Health, we said, okay, now the discussion now changed. We said, okay, if the money is here and yes, we have seen it, now how do we get it on the accounts of the different hospitals? Because ministry is still a government entity. It's too much in that they can even reverse that money and take it back. Honorable Riomus was the one who was chairing that meeting, and we were not easy on him. He had to direct the director of health services that can you call the hospital directors, let them start submitting the lists today. They actually instructed that they should even work throughout the weekend, even on Sunday and Saturday, to see that people can see money on hospital accounts, and we go back to work. And in that, actually, in that same meeting, the president directed that people should get half, an intern doctor should get half of what a medical officer who has finished internship and qualified should get, which is 5 million.
Yes.
And that is 2.5 million. Now, these officers went down and they started convincing interns and pushing them on the wall. And actually, they convinced them very well to extend the interns had agreed to get a lesser amount, 1.8 instead of 2.5. We said, no, these are our juniors. We have to protect them. The directive says 2.5. You give us your justification of 1.8 because the money was already passed in the supplementary budget. And the calculations were based on the 2.5. So where are you taking the other money? And they couldn't,
respond.
They couldn't respond.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, Bariomus, I think, didn't know what was happening in the background because he just realized that actually they had negotiated for less. When they couldn't explain to him, he said, let us follow what the president said. And then initially they wanted to pay only interns, but when we have senior house officers who also benefit from the same basket through Ministry of Health, he said now a senior house officer is a doctor who finished university, finished internship. They actually practice for some time. Then they come back to university to do their masters and become specialists. But they are under the university, but because when they are studying, they again go to these government hospitals and offer service because of the human resource gap. The government accepted to be giving them allowances like they give the interns. So he said, now you cannot increase for the interns and you don't give the SHO.
Yes.
And we had prior knowledge that actually part of this money was supposed to go to the SHOs, and they were not mentioning them. So we had to question. Yes, you have accepted for the interns. You should also send for the list of the senior house officers. Then they said, okay, now let us give all of them. And they accepted the 2.5 million. So we went back, realized that we didn't call off the strike there and then. We didn't suspend. We went back and kept quiet because we were following up to see how the process is moving. Is it true that money is actually being wired on people's accounts? So later we received actually confirmation from the hospital directors. They were submitting lists, and the money was 2.5 for both interns and SHOs. And the processes we are starting in Bank of Uganda, we said, okay, that is number one. Then the other way, we had filed a case against Ministry of Health. And the Director General of Health Services as an individual who was also put on that case because he had issued a directive that the interns should be chased out of the government premises.
Just to assure, is that the case with Sehad?
Yes.
Okay.
The case with the chauffeur, Sehad. Because initially when they issued that directive, the interns were up in arms and were all very scared. They ran to us like UMA, because we are like they are all under us.
The
They are
umbrella
our
body,
juniors.
yeah.
Like these people are going to throw us out. What can we do? Actually, what we did at first is that we wrote to Minister of Health and we requested for a meeting because the supervisors of these interns are within UMA. The supervisors were like, for us, we cannot chase our interns. They have been here working with us, offering a subs. Now you see me again. Someone I've been working with that I throw them out. They said, no, we cannot do that. And the Director General actually, he wanted them to do that, which is very impossible. You can't tell the father that you throw away your daughter. It will never happen.
Okay. So let me first move to Mr. Ochieno. Thank you. That was a very good background to this strike. Mr. Ochieno, we are in the middle of a pandemic. I can't move beyond 7 p.m. in this country because the government of Uganda is trying
officially.
The government of Uganda is trying to protect me from COVID. Whether I run a business, if I'm a Buddha rider, it's even early. I have to stop working by 6 p.m. and then go home and feed my kids on whatever little I have. What does it then say about the government that in the middle of this pandemic, they allow such a mess as a strike, the kind he has described, very easily avoidable? All he has shown us is that as soon as they became steadfast, the solution miraculously came to the fore, which means it was just a matter of making that solution available at the earliest opportunity, and wouldn't have gotten to this. So what does that say to the nature of government we have and the nature of leadership we have in this country?
I think Dr. Luswata has been fantastic.
Yes.
And I really hope every citizen listens to him. And during, as we prepared to come on set, we were chatting about other possibilities, other government workers. And we're saying that teachers, perhaps, we wondered whether or not they would have withstood what the medics have gone through, and whether going forward, this might actually be the way. I think it's actually fantastic panacea. I talk as a representative of a political party founded out of trade union movement. I talk as a representative of a political party founded to push for the rights, if you don't mind, and interests of ordinary Ugandan families and ordinary Ugandan workers. And so therefore, that in 35 years, and Dr. Luswata was very kind, 30 years of NRA, 35 years of a regime that came the manner in which it did, perhaps, it tells you something. But also, Dr. Luswata talked about Mr. Museveni's directives. I remember my late president saying that Mr. Museveni is somebody who tells the truth only by accident. So in a guarded way, perhaps, Mr. Museveni was really not telling our health workers the truth after all. But I think I want to repeat precisely what these guys did is exactly what Ugandans need to wake up to do. I have had issues with the organizations, including of previous leaders, in fact, supporting you guys even from a distance, including giving you guys airtime some times ago from major global networks that you needed to express and state your positions in our interests.
Okay.
And I say so for these reasons. One, that some of my closest friends are medical chiefs. One advises government, a major government in the Western world, as a top public health consultant. Another classmate of mine, one of the finest brains this country's ever had in Mwiri, is a top surgeon who got a major award in a powerful global world, not only recently. Possibly, that means he's one of the top two brains in that country as we talk.
Okay.
And the other, one of the best microbiologists in existing in another major developed nation. Now, these are Ugandans. Now, for the microbiologist was a medical intern pushed out of Masaka Hospital, out of conditions these guys were going through, reluctantly was going nearly through depression to visit another country, to visit a sister who coincidentally was a doctor, but working for an international agency, now not in medicine. Ugandan. And so she went and decided to stay away. And until today, she actually quite resents the fact that the failures of the Uganda government at the time to give her space, because she was trying to get space and people wanted bribes and she refused.
Okay.
So really, public services in this country is something that has been outsourced as early as the time when these guys came and privatized everything. Medical services in this country is something that you and me, perhaps when we get headaches now, we will not think about going to Mulago in the nearest facility. We'll be going to a pharmacy or a private hospital, which will almost certainly be private. It really tells of a situation in which COVID, and I think we should give this nation to God that we did not have as much deaths as could easily have happened because we generally not ready. So yes, your question is, amidst the pandemic, this. No, but these guys never prepared anyway. They never prepared for this. They were not prepared for anything else. I'm actually quite genuinely shocked.
Just, Mr. Ochieno, just the government of Uganda got huge loans from the IMF, from the World Bank. All these loans came to manage the pandemic. You would think that the people actually dealing with the pandemic themselves, the medics, whether they be interns, whether they be nurses, whether they be doctors like Mr. Luswata, should be the happiest people at the moment, as far as their wallet is concerned, that we are working extremely hard, as they are called the frontline workers. We are putting our lives at risk, not seeing our family, but at least we are getting paid for our services. So how do you explain the fact that even that has not happened? The money was there, definitely.
It's the crisis I'm referring to. And I'm just trying to tell you that this country, thankfully, the founding parents dedicated it to God. So we are actually living a life by accident. In fact, how it would happen in a manner in which at the peak of this pandemic, nobody can explain how a president commits to health workers 5 years ago. And these guys had to do what they did, impressively, as I said, in order for them to get the money. They're able to sit in the minister's office and the money is wired, meaning, to the extent that even some of the money being wired had already been calculated in such a manner that perhaps some of the percentages would go to some individuals. No, I think what you were telling us earlier, which possibly you forgot to say on air, was that we were expecting somebody from NRM here, and it's a pity they're not here because they'd possibly do some part explanation, just like I miss my good sister Sarah, to make sure that this is not an all-male panel. But no, clearly this government is a government that stepped in by accident. These guys chanced themselves by accident in 1986, and now they continue to rule for their self-interests rather than the interests of Uganda. Other than that, there's no way in which you can explain somebody boasting, including on social media, about how we are expanding and opening up roads in Congo, and the government should consider building a hospital in the borders with Congo. When a member of parliament kneels in the National Assembly because there are no medical facilities in Bugiri Hospital, a hospital which was built by UBC within 8 years, but it functions. So these guys can't even maintain existing health facilities. No, I think it's a manifestation of the priorities that we have, that we're able to invest huge amount of money to go in Congo, allegedly in pursuit of ADF, amidst the pandemic, when our health workers, really the most important unit, is as sick as this. I just want to say something very quickly. The UPC built and sought to build within 8 years of a government before Amin came, a health system which was akin to the UK health system. I happen to have lived reluctantly as a refugee, thanks to these crude guys in UK. It has actually one of the best public health systems. So I genuinely have an idea of how government, through taxation and locally generated resources, can actually provide basic and decent health facilities. One of the things that is happening, and just maybe rushing this conversation a bit, I just hope that you guys don't fall into the trap of this thing about medical insurance business, where we continue to entrench health services, as you rightly say, into a business or profit, the manner in which it's gone and it's going in American service. I genuinely hope we don't move through that. But thankfully, UPC is here to stay. We shall make sure that we protect what you guys have gained. We protect citizens of this country so that health in this country is not privatized as much and to the extent that which NRM has done.
Okay, thank you. Finally, Mr. Katana. So there's a lot of grumbling in this country. The teachers always threaten to have a strike. Makerere University, as I mentioned earlier, all the public universities in this country, they either strike or they come this close to a strike almost every semester. Now that the doctors have finally have been heard and their demands have been met. So what advice do you give to these other people? How should they conduct themselves going forward if they need to get the government's ear into addressing the problems that they're facing?
Well, thank you very much, Godwin, and good afternoon to our viewers once again. First of all is to applaud the doctors for standing up for their rights. We were having a conversation earlier and we observed that oppression and resistance follow each other like day and night. And I think it is part of the human nature that once you are oppressed, then you must fight that resistance and make sure that your dignity as a human being is respected. But to begin with, why do we have pulling of ropes between essential service providers like teachers, doctors, and others, and the government of Uganda? I think it speaks to the general mindset of and the structure of General Museveni's politics, that the key priority of the government is to retain power and not to serve the people of Uganda and not to engineer socioeconomic transformation. And so you'll find that his attention and that of those who serve him is on schemes that ensure that he stays in power. And so that's why when the medics stand up, they are listened to, because now the deprivation and infringement on their rights is translating into something that threatens Museveni's power. Because when they start, protesting, now it becomes political and it threatens his hold on power and it becomes a priority. But they do not look at the welfare of the doctors as a priority generally. Not just the welfare of doctors, but if you look at the state of our hospitals, and unfortunately, you'll find that there are shortage of drugs, sometimes on account of lack of supervision and the attendant corruption. You'll find that some of the medical practitioners are even not at the hospital when they are supposed to be there because they are not paid. If I have worked for 3 months and I'm not paid, I must find a private health facility where I should work and earn a living. And then, of course, the supervision, just from top. The president is not supervising his ministers. The prime minister is not supervising the ministers. The ministers are not supervising the people they are supposed to supervise. And what we get is poor service delivery on account of people that are not interested in running state affairs, but are interested in keeping power. And their interest in state affairs is when it relates to them retaining power. So the priorities are in a different area altogether.
Okay.
And so it always takes that raising of voices for them to listen. The other challenge again is that lack of focus on the part of government. Because you see, the argument has been from some quarters that these doctors are being selfish.
Yes.
They are being greedy. But the people who are saying that the doctors are being greedy are wasting resources that would have gone
To the doctors.
to the doctors. You go to these ministries, you'll find people as small as commissioners having 3 cars, even people below them. Cars for doing what? For comfort. before the pandemic, people are running conferences in London, Dubai, wherever they announce there is a conference, a delegation from Uganda is going to attend. Not because they want to benchmark and learn, but because they want allowances. The other day, there were these sports, interparliamentary sports in Arusha. Almost half of parliament
Was in Arusha.
Not because the sports are so dear to them, because if sports was so dear to them, they would prioritize
The sports in Uganda.
sports in Uganda. But they are rushing to Arusha to earn allowances. So it's not, and why doesn't the leadership have a problem with that? The leadership doesn't have a problem with that because, again, it relates to the general patronage system that dictatorships globally and since time immemorial thrive on.
Okay.
Because these people that the regime spends money on, who are not so useful to the people of Uganda but to the regime, are part and parcel of the political machinery of General Museveni. So that's where his interest is. That's where he's spending the money of Ugandans instead of spending it on making sure that they get quality services.
Okay. So let me just a minute. Let me say something. Get something from Mr.
No, I actually wanted to allow Dr. Luswata to say something slightly more, because one major credit we've not given them is, other than the state of the infrastructure, medical infrastructure, which in a way has helped to advance the point against which the NRA guys would say that you guys are pushing for your self-interest with your salaries. So I was rather impressed that you guys had to raise the question of drugs in hospitals. So in terms of the settlements, could you just tell us what how far you went on that and what you see as your future?
Yes, that's the exact question I wanted to ask.
Oh, beautiful.
I just want to know, like, what have we agreed in this? Yeah. As far as, for instance, improvement of the health system generally is concerned, I read somewhere that you're asking that is it a senior medical officer or something be given a car with a chauffeur? So I just wanted to know, like, what exactly are these things that you've called for, and how many of those has government agreed to meet, and what their position is on the rest?
Yeah, generally what we are pushing from the beginning was the welfare of all health workers, actually, not only doctors.
Yes.
That is number two. Then the whole change in the health system, because it is also rotten, and even if they improve our welfare as the health workers and we go back to the same rotten health system, still we may not deliver to what we exactly want. One of our demands on the side of the health system actually was to ensure that, for example, you have national referral hospitals and regional referral hospitals by standard and by design. These hospitals are supposed to be having ICUs, but we have seen during the pandemic, people are traveling from Mbare, others are traveling from Uguru, others from, from wherever. They are all running to Murago to come and get ICU. But Murago can never accommodate the whole country because they have a very small ICU. Among these hospitals, very few of them actually have functional ICUs, but by standard, the ICUs are supposed to be there. And some of these hospitals are new, like Kawempe and Chirudu. Then you wonder, was it the engineers who didn't know? Because the engineer actually, they will tell you.
The engineers follow the plans they have given.
You see, yeah.
They know the standard, what is supposed to happen there. But then you wonder, is it Minister of Health who suggested the change of plans? So you see, even there, when they are giving maybe contracts, some things happen in the middle, and at the end of the day, it goes down to affect the public. Because why would someone travel from Guru and all the way to come and seek for ICU, and yet they are supposed to have ICUs in those areas? And even when you construct a new hospital like Chirudu and Kawempe, you still don't give them ICUs, and yet you make costing, and then by standard, these things are supposed to be there, and then they are not there. So there's also a problem there. So we're advocating that these hospitals have ICU, because we still have Corona. Omicron is coming. We should be seeing a movement to see that these ICUs are set up. The buildings are big and they have space actually where they can put the ICU beds and functionalize them. The doctors who can work in these ICUs, we have them here in Uganda. They can come and help Ugandans. Yes. So then the other thing was, we are tired of this business of a patient comes to you in the hospital, and then you send them to go and buy a glove of 2,000. When they come back, you examine them, then you write the medicines, and again you are telling them that now you're explaining on behalf of government. for a month, for years, you get tired. Now you know this one, we don't have this one, you have to go and buy. Some of them who are a bit political, and some councillors have abused us. We have taken abuses on behalf of government. Then now you doctors, you are the ones stealing our drugs. We are paying our taxes. Why are you telling me to go and buy? Why don't you give me? Okay, you buy for me. So that was the other issue. Changing the structure of the hospitals. We need to have enough drugs and the gloves in the health facilities. I mean, we get tired of, you know, mother comes, she's in labor. Some maybe have been digging. She just comes the way she is. She knows I've come to a government hospital. She doesn't even have money to buy gloves. Sometimes doctors have actually bought these things for patients. Because you will not leave someone to die when you have like a 10K here and what they need is a glove. You have to foot the bill and it's okay. Sometimes they come and in the lower facilities, the situation is worse. Maybe the theater is there, but there's no doctor. These lower cadres, the clinic officers and the midwives, they use their own money to buy to hire vehicles to transport mothers to higher facilities. It has been happening. It is the order of the day. Sometimes they use police cars actually. They call the police, they contribute fuel, then these Kayunga police have been transferring mothers to big hospitals. So these are the issues we have been fronting. And then that is on the side of the patients. 12, the hospitals which are up to standard the way they're supposed to be, to have the sundries in the hospitals. Then the other biggest monster, which is happening right now actually, is the employment gap in the government health sector. Because we have over 60% of the positions in these government hospitals which are not being filled.
60%.
60%. It is only 40%. You know, patients come and they complain that, you know, doctors are bad. You come and you sit the whole day, you don't say doctor. These are the reasons why. Ideally, when you go to the standards, one doctor is supposed to be in charge of around 1,000 population. But in Uganda, one doctor is in charge of 21,000.
Wow.
So you realize that one doctor has to do a job of over 21 doctors, and which is impossible. You'll never do it. So at the end of the day, it is the patients who suffer. They will come. You see the ones who came first, you get tired in the time for you to go home also comes. You fear to pass them, you go back there and say, okay, let me go back home and rest. And what happens is that you see many of them, but because the majority, the ones you have not seen are much more than the ones you've seen. They have a higher voice, and actually they say that doctors don't work. Their voices will be much, and the general picture will be that doctors don't work in the government facilities, and it becomes a problem. So the other issue, and this one we explained it very well to the president, that it is really bad. You build these hospitals, you refurbish them, but as long as the human resource is not present, you are not helping any Uganda.
No.
These buildings can't treat patients. Employers. We are here because there are many doctors actually who want to work for government. Some are working in private medical centers. At the moment, actually, in Uganda, we have doctors who are unemployed. It never happened during time, or even any other time. But in Museveni's regime, we have doctors who are unemployed. When people hear about such a thing in other countries, they wonder that what is happening. And on many occasions, some countries actually have come up to hire Ugandan doctors. And you know what the government has done? They block them.
There was that talk of sending doctors to Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes, they have allowed nurses because, you know, nurses, you can train others and, you know, they cover the gap. But doctors are not easy to replace. It takes a lot of time, 5 years to replace the ones you have lost. So what they do, they keep blocking. The doctors can't go anywhere, then they allow the nurses to keep moving out. And I think this is what Kenya has done, but I can't blame Kenya. Kenya at least is trying to pay their doctors very well. But they have allowed the nurses to exit, but they are not also allowing. Now, Uganda is worse. You don't want to employ them, you also don't want others to employ them. You want them to end on the street, which is very funny. So he told the president that employ the doctors in Uganda to go and help your voters. So actually, he told him your voters, because people gave him powers to be president. And then he said, actually agreed, he said, okay, now what we are going to do, what we should do, every sub-county where we have an MP, at least we must have a doctor. When he saw the light, because he realized that at the end of the day, when these people don't get the service, it is on him. That Museveni is not serving us, yet he told us such and such a thing. So he agreed to this, and he said by July next year, I hope we implement it.
Do you have faith in that?
You know, with this government, you can't be very sure. and that's why I was telling you that we had to file a case
With the courts.
Against Minister of Health and the Director General. In this case, he had to go and state that he has withdrawn the directive to chase away health workers, and it will never happen again. And then the court, our lawyers are also very smart. They made him also to write a commitment that actually the man is promised to pay. It is going to be paid, and other things are good. They are going to make sure that they are worked on. And the reason why they did this is that maybe next time, as the lawyers can also come and also try to push in their own way.
Okay.
So the other thing we agreed on was to have a task force to ensure that this employment of doctors, the medical supplies, and then the restructuring of the health facilities to ensure that they have to standard are worked on. And actually, on that day, we had to submit names of, because we said we have to be part of it so that we can keep monitoring the process. We had to submit those names at State House on that same day during that meeting. And then they are also getting people on the other side to be on the task force. The task force is to ensure that these presidential directives are implemented. Then the other thing was about the tax-free vehicles, which brought a lot of politics. I don't know where the politics is coming from. Some people are actually pointing at us that we shall make sure you don't get these cars. We say, look, let us wait and we see what happens. And then,
so the tax-free vehicles are like you buy your car, but you don't pay taxes. That should be easy to.
Yeah, you know, he made this directive in 2017. He's just repeating it, and we don't know who is blocking that. So the task force is also to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Then the other very funny thing during Obote, his time, a senior consultant, because that is U1 SE, a senior consultant in health is supposed to have a car, is supposed to have a house, and workers at home. They used to get them during those times.
When the government's.
Yes, that is how it is supposed to be. But during this government, without any change in the policies or any laws, someone just came and just scrapped all those benefits. So a senior consultant in this regime cannot get a car. He doesn't have the workers at home. You just get a contract, your contract the way it is, and you get a small salary.
How can he have a car when the whole hospital doesn't have an ambulance?
So the whole thing is funny. So we said that such a thing should also be worked on. Then we gave them, because we also agreed that the 5 million for the medical officers, because this one they implemented for interns, they said because it is small money, let us implement this. Then the 5 million for medical officers and the senior consultants plus their cars should come by July next year.
Okay.
And then we said, okay, let us give you up to 1st May, because what we want to see, we are following up on these budget issues, the budget framework paper, to see that as long as all those things are there, by 1st May we shall not strike. But if we see unseriousness,
you can go back to there.
We shall come back for another industrial action, because this is what we have learned, that this is what works.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luswata. Thank you very much, our dear viewers. That marks the end of our first segment of today's discussion. In the next segment, we shall mainly look at the Kayunga elections, what lessons we pick from it, and that should start in the next few minutes. For the meantime, we just call upon you to subscribe to this channel, turn on your notification, and always get notified when new video is uploaded. So see you after the break.
Violence, anger and hatred, misery, loss and pain. No, this shouldn't be the situation after elections. Fellow youth and Ugandans, now that elections are over, it is time to embrace our differences in opinion, political affiliations, and other issues that tend to divide us. We need to refocus on all the things that are beneficial to us, our families and friends. It's our duty to restore peace in our communities, and even as we participate in democratic processes, it's important that we do it with dignity. Say no to post-election violence. This message is brought to you by Center for Constitutional Governance in partnership with Action Aid Uganda.
Okay, dear viewers, welcome back to the second and final episode of today's discussion. We are going to look primarily at the Kayunga by-elections that happened a couple of days back. I also need to inform you that we've been joined by Sarah Bireete, the Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Governance, and she replaces Dr. Luswata, who left after making submissions on the strike of the doctors and the interns and all the other players in the medical field. So without wasting any time, I'll begin with Mr. Katana Benjamin. Mr. Katana Benjamin, watching everything that happened around the Kayunga elections, the blocking of Bobby Wine, the military deployment, the announcement of results, the generality of it, what came to your mind and what do you make of the exercise that went down in Kayunga?
What happened in Kayunga, in my view, is a timely reminder, or was a timely reminder, that we are dealing with a situation in Uganda where the state of Uganda has continued to shrink and is being replaced by an individual, General Museveni. And as a consequence, all state institutions work at his behest. They have lost neutrality and independence, and they only work according to his wishes, because many of them believe that they hold the positions they do as a favor and taken from him. And so that is on the negative. The positive is that there was massive, when you look at the massive rigging that took place in Kayunga, the flawed process from nominations, the arrest and harassment of the supporters and agents of the NUP candidate, the decision to block the NUP president, the Honorable Kyagulanyi, from going to campaign for the party candidate in Kayunga, and what the bribery, you saw people lining up to receive money from the Prime Minister of Uganda. But with all that rigging, the people of Kayunga still stood their ground and voted for the NUP candidate, which prompted the regime in the last minute to make a very silly and laughable act of altering the results. And you know, many times there has always been an argument that all people in opposition are just making noise, no evidence. Fortunately, we have all the declaration forms. In fact, during the final tally session of the results, when the Electoral Commission started announcing results that were a clear departure from the results as recorded at polling stations and reflected in the declaration forms signed by the officials of the Electoral Commission, our agents at the tally center protested. And what does the security do? Pushes them out of the tally center. And again, that also emphasizes that the conspiracy does not only involve Electoral Commission. It involves security agencies and the entire political machinery of General Museveni.
Okay.
And so that the people of Kayunga were able to push the regime to the level of doing what they had to do after bribery, after ballot stuffing, but they again, after intimidation, they went ahead and rejected the NRM candidate. For me, it gives me hope that we are making progress in the fight to dismantle the dictatorship and liberate the people of Uganda. And many times, the regime wants to push an argument that security comes in to maintain law and order. But I think it is very important for people of Uganda to appreciate the political landscape. That, again, drawing from that analogy of the shrinking state of Uganda, is that the security members of the security agencies have been drawn into partisan politics as active participants on the side of General Museveni. And so even when they are deployed during these electoral processes, their brief is not to maintain law and order, but to ensure that the candidate of his choice or himself comes through, regardless of whether rules have been followed or not. Okay. Of course, that is worrying, because you see the cycle of having the army and the people on different sides. They have tried to be cosmetic and call it Uganda People's Defense Forces. Maybe, but you know, General Museveni, I don't know if it's on account of age or maybe now he looks at us as subjects. Many times he comes out and speaks freely. He says, "This is my army." So maybe the name should be changed and they call it Museveni's Defense Forces. Even at during the campaigns in Kayunga, he mentioned that what NRM wants, it must get. Again, he spoke his mind, regardless whether the rules are followed or not. So we need to have that clear appreciation of things, that we do not fall for the deception of security forces that they came out to enforce law and order. Their main and primary objective when they come out is to ensure that the candidate of General Museveni's choice gets leverage over the other candidates.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
But maybe just to mention that our candidate of NUP, Harriet Nakwed, has taken a position that she wants to challenge the results in courts of law. And there have been arguments, if you have been following the discussions, of people saying, but these courts have not helped us previously. But I think what we need to appreciate is that fighting a dictatorship is not an event. It is a process, and all platforms must be utilized. And while we do not go to these courts because we have confidence in their independence and impartiality, on account of track record, because many times they have acted in a manner that clearly shows they are partisan. But we go to these courts as extension of the battlefield to make sure that we continue to engage and advance. Eventually, darkness will fall and light will come. The liberation never comes as a gift. People must fight
And get it.
with a lot of resilience. The regime maybe sometimes does some of these things to frustrate people. That you say, oh, and you normally hear those voices that, why do we participate in an election when we know who the winner is going to be? The intention is to discourage people say, and give up. Say, this man, let him do whatever he wants. There is an analogy, maybe Sarah is conversant with it, that the cow stepped on a frog. The frog was helpless. Said, you of the horns, whatever you decide is what will happen. So they are pushing us to reach that level. People say they have given up. Say, it's up to you. Whatever you choose, you're the emperor.
Okay.
We shall follow that.
Okay, thank you. No, let me first come to Ochieno. You come from a similar position, an opposition party, UPC. He has just, what we also in Kayunga is that elections per se may not determine the winner, that you can actually win them and somebody else is announced. And more or less life goes back to normal, in quotes. So how do you fight against such a situation as an opposition party? What do you do differently now to ensure that at the very least, if your candidate gets the majority of votes, he or she is announced?
I was actually going to pass to my sister, Sarah, but since you've locked me onto that, I'll respond, but very briefly to give us space, particularly because you just come in, and as I said, it's a big relief, actually, in terms of the composition of this panel. But if I may, Sarah, I think what NUP are doing is the right thing, one. Number two, I'm actually quite relieved that they're challenging these matters in court. Number three, I'm actually relieved hearing from Bain that actually they have evidence in their hands. And number four, therefore, going to court, doing something that Museveni could not do in 1980 before going to the bush. This guy is able to go ahead and present evidence to court. Let the court expose themselves, let the judiciary expose themselves and confirm their partisanship. But I think beyond that, I personally have a case in court in which my opponents did not know that I would have all the sufficient evidence. I'm so confident that all I'm waiting for is for COVID, because it's very clear that I know I'm going to win it. But it would also be very interesting to see where I possibly lose on technicality grounds. So it's the right thing to do. And then number 4, very importantly, Sarah leads in civil society. The two of us are from the political circles. Part of what the NRA has attempted to do is to present that anything alternative to them is war and murder. Anything alternative to them is mayhem. Anything alternative to them is, bombs in town. And they completely forget that for them, as I said, they lost elections, went to the bush. So we need to be able to show that we can actually alternatively put pressure. But that said, your important point, as it happens, it's actually absolutely possible in a by-election like this especially, for the vast majority of the people in mass to critically make it impossible for NRA to win, meaning the rigging. So starting with the documentation, the organization of the systems, the structures and places, here basically they're imposing it because they had the instructions. In my case, I'll keep using it. In my case, while we're compiling the reports from various districts, and I was concerned, and the chair of the Electoral Commission was no longer responding to my calls and messages, one of the senior commissioners said, Joseph, don't you worry. When it comes to the final tally, we'll make sure that you and all your agents are there. And that sort of consoled me. When time came, the reality was so apparent. I was neither there nor any of my agents. In fact, to the extent that they even releasing the results, they released it on via Zoom, and so this is how extreme people can want to try to attempt to do things. And even that, they still thought that I would put up my hands. I did not. So it's sort of where we are. So dealing with people like this, you do exactly what these guys have done. So most importantly, going forward, beyond Kayunga, it has to be organization. Yeah. It has to be maximum presence of people. Ensuring that every polling station with evidence from the photography to the fine guys, the guys who cannot be bribed, and we talk about by-elections again, another by-election, if it takes place in Nagongere, you make sure that actually you're more than 2 agents there in case one person gets overwhelmed by 1 million shillings. Okay. Things like so basically that's what you do. Really going forward for these guys, I actually don't know what they can do except to fudge on technicality grounds in Kayunga. If you have the evidence, you've got the tally sheets, and actually the most amazing bit which I've just got here is that actually these things are even signed by returning officers. So it will be amazing, and we'll be looking forward with massive interest, and Sarah will tell us, how else you can argue that these things were others fudged. But thinking about this as I was coming to the studios, I was just wondering how a by-election in Kayunga that concluded at 4 o'clock. It's a by-election that has taken huge amount of money. Forget about Chagulanyi being stopped. Forget about Museveni going to Uganda West, big bits of our fuel, traveling there. For a by-election, for a district council chairperson, within the year of election, when there is no major controversy, do or die in terms of electoral figures, suppose it's a parliamentary thing for which the numbers are closed, and then the chief of the Electoral Commission is actually there. The entirety of the team that we know go into these processes. And then it concludes at 4, it's contested. Taking it overnight to the following day, you're basically telling citizens to lose confidence. So even in the very extremely unlikely event that there's nothing fudged, in terms of public confidence, you're putting doubt on the faces of the people, confirming that there was something untoward which you guys were trying to play. So I think it is organization going forward. It is maximum numbers. And then final thing, actually. Although this is a minor point, maybe for opposition spaces like in by-elections like Kayunga, I just thought that the 500 or so alleged votes, in the extreme cases that they were true, perhaps 2 independents, one of whom got 1,000 votes, I'm just food for thought, as a political leader thinking going forward, maybe these are things that means that opposition going forward need to vote tactfully, but need to have much more coordinated working across the political divide, where I would like to have seen that in the event that I was actually holding the keys to the UPC office, that I'm actually present in Kayunga, actually by the Kayunga is one of our stronger areas traditionally in Buganda, and that we have a presence there across the political divide. That not only is there NUP and DP because they're the political parties that actually were participating there, but the other leaders come almost like the kind of thing that actually happen in Bugiri. So you basically make it impossible for these guys by your numbers, by your presence. But as I said, it will be through our skills, less of their money and their security presence.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, looking at the election in Kayunga, we can't take it out of and look at it in isolation. This has been an election year. Last year in November, very many Ugandans were killed in the process of an election. We've seen opposition leaders getting arrested in Uganda has become like the norm. For each and every election, people are kidnapped, people are arrested, people go missing. The government says civil society organizations like yours are trying to cause mayhem in the country. Are elections becoming so costly for us as a nation that we perhaps should sit back and consider an alternative in electing leaders that does not involve elections, given the amount of bloodshed and trouble that comes with elections each time we have them in this country?
Well, it is very unfortunate that the year started with sham elections on 14th January and has ended with sham elections in Kayunga. Very, very unfortunate. When Justice Biawakama, times it's even painful to use that title, given the demonstration of his leadership at the Electoral Commission. When Justice Biawakama was appointed Chair Electoral Commission, he made a statement and said, the things of the past are over. The rigging, the failure to announce on time, the rest. And recently, Engineer Chugund, and rightly so, laughed at him during the mess toward the January elections when he almost declared himself deaf and dumb. the time when he said, I have no TV, I don't know what's happening. You really would see somebody who is operating from deaf. So I think we need to focus on Electoral Commission. Electoral Commission has a constitutional duty to discharge. Electoral Commission is violating group rights of Ugandans that are protected under Article 1, Article 20, Article 45 of the Constitution and subsequently reinforced in the Human Rights Enforcement Act. We need to have a clear focus on abuse of group rights of Ugandans, freely elect their leaders, and hold some people individually responsible for the mess in our elections. The second mess that we need to document is the security forces. It doesn't matter where they pay their allegiance to. The constitution that creates and brings them into office demands that they serve Ugandans. So I think we need to up our game in holding people responsible for messing our right to choose leaders in this country. I think we have relaxed a bit on that front. We need also to look at international instruments. What do they say on abuse of group rights? We've been taking human rights literally to mean torture, abuse, arrest. No. Political rights are fundamental human rights. Protected under the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, protected under all instruments of human rights.
Yes.
So I think we need to up our game on that front of saying, look, political rights, when you abuse political rights, you are as bad as somebody doing kidnaps, doing torture, doing trial of civilians in military courts, etc. There is no difference. We need also to review all these international instruments. I know ACDEC and the Act on Human and People's Rights under the African Commission creates those specific rights, and the Biawakama can be held accountable under the AU instruments. So we need also to have a question for interpretation in the African court. on human and people's rights, on the conduct of elections in this country.
Okay.
We need to have interpretation in the East African court.
Mm.
The principles of the treaty are mainly two: settlement of disputes, good governance. And good governance is explained in the principles of the treaty. So I think I would love to see a case in High Court in Uganda, a case in the East African court, a case in the African court, and an inquiry in international courts as far as abuse of group rights to freely elect their leaders are concerned.
If I may just come in there, do you have faith in the institutions you've listed?
You
Africa-
see, Toko, to me it is not a question of faith. As a people, we should either promote and push for rule of law, the alternative of which is anarchy. As civic actors, as civilized political leaders, I expect us to keep pushing the line of rule of law, regardless of the challenges that we face.
Okay.
Because the alternative is anarchy, and we cannot afford that.
Okay. So since I'll start the next round of questions from you, and we are glad that you joined us as a lady. When you look at Kayunga, the army, the deployment, one of the candidates went to vote with a huge patch of plaster on her face, injured in the scuffles that ensued there. Just yesterday, I think, Makerere University Business School was supposed to have petty guild elections. And there was tear gas, there was the military, and all this. So from the perspective of a lady, in this country, it seems the elections are becoming so militant. Where does that leave women who are at this point needed to occupy more of these political positions? If every election turns out into a place where there's going to be chaos, there's going to be tear gas, there's going to be fighting. I won't say that men are more resilient, but ordinarily, one would expect that those affect women more. So doesn't that work against the agenda that we need more women into these spaces?
This country has a female vice president.
Yes, it does.
Has a female prime minister.
Yes.
The prime minister camped in Kayunga for more than a week.
Yes.
Did she see these things? Is she a woman?
Yes, she is a woman.
So to me, I think it is no longer a question of gender. Because when we say these are crimes of NRM, the top hierarchy of NRM is 1 man and 2 women today. So these are crimes of also women leaders.
Yeah.
They are not crimes of male leaders.
Okay.
I call upon women to look at these challenges as challenges of the citizens of this country, challenges of their husbands, their sons, their grandsons, and we cannot abandon them to the male gender because they are part of the problem.
Okay. So, Mr.
But
Chair,
before I leave, I want to give, what is the historical significance of Kayunga? The relationship with NRM, especially the violent relationship. I hope citizens recall the fight for Kayunga in 2009.
yes.
Those were the first violent riots that we experienced as a country. Kayunga riots, I think, paralyzed Kampala for a week. Some of us, depending on your color, your size of the nose, etc., you could not leave your homes. I have a colleague who comes from Mbale, that is very light-skinned, like Mchotara, and so he was mistaken for a Western, and his head was burst into 2.
Sorry.
Yes. So we should not distance Kayunga and NRM and violence from the 2009 Kayunga riots. From there, what is at stake today? NRM is at loggerheads with Uganda Kingdom. First was the vote of no confidence they received from Buganda region during the elections, where all ministers, including the vice president, lost the elections, and of course Snoop claimed victory in the central region. And from then on, then the president, including just his first victory speech, he sent a signal. It was a very angry speech. I was surprised that a victor can be that angry It puts questions on whether he was a victor or not. Because why would a victor be angry? You are really celebrating. Where do you get the anger from after winning elections? So that was really surprising. Second is the attack against Uganda that started that very day. And the continuing attacks, exchanges over Mailo land, exchanges about the Kabaka, and then this is a district in Uganda where NRM wanted to push and make sure they have space. But also Kayunga has a unique composition of the troubles that Nantava has been, Honorable Nantava, facing with the land grabbers in Kayunga, people even threatening her life. So this is the district that we are talking about with mixed, populations, where there was an attempt to create a fake Kabaka to undermine the Kabaka of Uganda, and the fight against Uganda. So it has been a continuation of that fight. I'm glad that the National Unity Platform is taking the course they are taking. And I'm also happy that the people of Kayunga were able, against all intimidation, to assert themselves at who the choice of their leader was.
Okay. So, Mr. Ochieno, in the immediate aftermath of Kayunga, we've also seen that the fissures within the opposition seem to be re-emerging. We've seen counter accusations back and forth, some opposition people saying, oh, the Bobby Wine, the NUP team thought that they know what to do. While we warned them, they didn't listen to us. Now let them face the heat. The party's president of DP, Norbert Mao, has had a very, very fierce exchange on Twitter, where he told people that even the current leader of opposition in parliament was a beneficiary of the former IGP's fuel, that scandal that once was unearthed. So it seems like the election, rather than unite the opposition, as you had suggested earlier, has again done what people have always dreaded, that is dividing the opposition further. So what lessons should these people learn from such elections, like you've said, and how best can they unite around a single issue and then move forward to winning more victories, rather than having the loss and then laughing at each other and all that we are seeing happening in the aftermath of Kayunga?
I think that's very, very unfortunate. And indeed, I had suggested at the beginning, but perhaps not trying to be as apparent as you now want me to be. I think to the laughters and enjoyments and celebrations of Mr. Museveni, he's basically placed Ugandans exactly where he wants us to be. And that's why much earlier I was really pleased that citizens through Uganda Medical Association have woken up and attempted to do what generally needs to be done across the various trades and professions, including farmers, to ensure that this government is held to account to do the responsible stuff, some of which, as Sarah was very clearly legalistically articulating. There is a clear question of leadership in this country, and it's a crisis, it's a national crisis from the top, starting with Mr. Museveni, as Sarah says, where you allegedly win elections, and then instead of coming to your citizens with the humility to say thank you, and then to promise them good hope, you're coming sort of like to bash them. That actually shows that you've now taken them so much for granted that anyway, many other citizens will question whether or not you're actually their leader. Okay. But then coming to the political position, it is very unfortunate. I hope I committed myself last year, about 13 or so months ago, that in the very likely event that I was elected UPC leader, one of the few things I would do was not only to try and bring together UPC, but I would work very, very actively and very quickly with to ensure that UPC provides the leadership, and leadership within the context of this conversational thing with all other political parties and organization leaders, so that, meaning opposition lead parties, so that we're able to coalesce around issues of national interest, but most importantly, as political opposition facing this rogue NRA regime that imposed itself 36 years ago now, people, but does not now in any way remember that they allegedly came to power following a vicious war, allegedly following a rigged election. I think I was very disappointed that I did not see some of the traditional leaders of opposition at the forefront. And some of the traditional leaders are names, possible or not to go to individual names, but yes, quite clearly, there are people whom I expected to have rallied around the elections. Granted, DP had a candidate, but nothing stopped DP actually working closely with the NUP because those are established political parties that had candidates down there. Now, for me, again, through my experiences across the world, these things actually genuinely work. You can actually do strategic campaigning to the extent that perhaps even in wards, meaning parishes where you don't have strength, you can actually jointly work as a political position person to add the numbers to make it impossible for these guys to actually rig. But beyond that, the other political parties that could not field candidates, I told you that in the event that I was actually formally present as a leader of UPC, I would have wanted to see myself there adding the voice. I think going forward, surprisingly, again, as I said, we saw Bugiri, we saw Arua, and then there was Busia. Busia was under Chigund. I will say it, that there was a big attempt at scandalizing the processes in Busia to the extent that without specific details, it was as much a shambles as this, but the opposition still won, in Busia, meaning they made it impossible for these guys to turn around. I think, I hope that our colleagues in FDC, our colleagues in DP, our colleagues in ANT, our colleagues in other political organizations, and definitely those people who claim leadership in UPC outside my pending authorities, wake up to the reality that at any future opportunity, particularly by elections, actually usually a very good opportunity to beat NRM because you use the numbers, if you like, the vast of ideas to actually minimize and neutralize this. So it should be able to happen. But it shouldn't really also be about by-elections. Museveni is such a tired man that whether he likes it or not, one day he'll wake up in the morning and say he's actually too tired to go to the loo. In which case, therefore, there is need for leadership, an alternative leadership of ideas, and that must come from the democratic opposition. It should not really it should not be about elections. Sarah amazingly actually said something very interesting, which has really woken me up about alternatives, including beyond what I was actually thinking, beyond Kayunga. Holding the Electoral Commission to account, holding the security services to account, questioning fellow citizens why we should have the army in by-elections, not the police. Asking these funny, dubious guys called Gisos, taunting our people instead of guaranteeing that actually people are going to bed and sleep. What is their job? Being and taking partisan positions. These guys need to know that time will come when they will be held to account. I think it was during break that Sarah was telling us about a story about Ghana. We can talk about Ghana. I've talked about Ghana here, where leaders of one arm of government pick up phones and call the other leaders of the other arm of government. We can see you, we can hear you saying, this is the position I will take. I also use Ghana as an example. Before the cross to this competitiveness, when some funny incumbent wanting to hold back, there was a stalemate. These two incumbents met. Leaders of the security forces called them and said, you guys, we are not going to say anything. You know these figures and you know the facts. We are not going to take sides. You better decide.
Okay.
The victor took the lead. The other person pulled back. By and large, Ghana is emerging out of this nonsense. We know the security services in this country are properties of Mr. Museveni, and you're quite right. Really, it's Mr. Museveni's thing, but it's really an offshoot of NRA, as it were. Most of these guys are young citizens. Most of them actually happens to be younger than me, in many cases, your generation. These people need to know that Museveni will go, Uganda will remain. I can't wait as president of UPC working with them in securing Uganda for Ugandan citizens, including their grandchildren. They should know that we will guarantee that, including Museveni's grandchildren. But this country belongs to all of us. So I think it's really about all of us taking that position. And the position in Uganda, leadership, so-called leadership in this country, taking it also upon themselves that they're not only leaders of political parties as oppositions, but they're leaders for all the people of Uganda. So whatever action we do is a responsible action. Now, quick one. I know that there are many disputes about taking spaces. So sometimes there will be conflicts between possibly, I think I better say this, conflicts between a bit of FDC and NUP. And once in a while, possibly because it's traditional Buganda, my good friend Norbert might think that the new kids in the block are threatening traditional territory inside Buganda. I think that is where we need leadership. And this leadership should go beyond personalities. I believe should go beyond political parties. It should be about this country. And when we get this country free and open, then we can bring in our ideas and versions, put in the table. Uganda is determined, and that will be the leadership that will lead this, take this country forward beyond Mr. Museveni and NRA.
Okay, so Katana, when Moses Chigongo, the deputy NRM chairperson, was in Kayunga, he said Kayunga is the entry point that will mark the fall of NUP in Buganda. All the consolidation, all the gains NUP had made will start falling from Kayunga. And maybe true to his word, we saw what Sarah has described, the deployment, we saw the rigging, we saw the bribery, and all these other things that were not supposed to happening. The Prime Minister was there for this time. The President was there. So it seems like the ruling party is going to go all the way. They're going to break a leg. They're willing to give an arm and leg to ensure that Buganda gets back to them. Is NUP prepared for such a kind of fight that we seem to see unfolding right in our eyes?
Thank you. Well, certainly, to begin with, is that nothing happening is unanticipated. Why? Because General Museveni has a track record. With all the dictatorship that he espouses, he always clamors for legitimacy. And so he's fighting so much, and in Kayunga we are fighting so much to show that they are still acceptable and they are a legitimate government. But in so doing, they are emerging more illegitimate. And what is important is how we organize going forward. And this should not be restricted to Uganda, but Uganda generally, because NUP was not only voted for in Uganda. So we must be a step ahead, and they should chase us, not the other way around. And I think the results coming from Kayunga confirm that while it is the wish of Chigongo and NRM to reclaim this region, they cannot do so by winning the hearts and souls of the people. That's why they have resorted to what they know well, using guns. But everything has an end, and I think regardless of the noise coming from their side, like the one you have pointed out, and their seeming now open reliance on force, in my view, is evidence that this is the last line of defense, because they have used manipulation, it has not helped. They have used money, it has not helped. And so now they have resorted to what they know well, which is repression. And repression attracts more resistance. And so our duty is to provide leadership in that regard, and we are prepared and committed to do so, because we have a reason as people of Uganda to resist anybody that wants to impose himself and his views on the people of Uganda.
Okay. So I've been reminded that our time is fast spent. So I'm going to have the conclusions. We are going to start with Sarah and then move in that clockwise order. So we begin with Sarah. The conclusions concerning Kayunga, and if perhaps you have a message for our viewers as we come closer to the end of the year.
Now, my message on elections is not far from the Constitution. Article 1 is very clear on the supremacy of the people. And it states that the people will choose who should govern them in regular, free, and fair elections. We should stop settling for less as Ugandans. The characteristics of a free and fair election are very clear. There should be a leveled ground. There should be freedom of association, expression, and assembly. They should be, it should be non-violent. It should do the times, for example, when people woke up and the electoral commission officials had ticked so many people to have voted and ballots were fully stuffed. The electoral laws laid down clearly how an election is supposed to commence, with the 8 witnesses, with the boxes opened, pushed upside down for everybody to witness they are empty, and the time for opening polls. All this was abused. Unfortunately, all the leadership of the Electoral Commission was present in Kayunga. I hope they were not there on a tour business and the purposes of getting per diem from Ugandans. The chairman Electoral Commission was in Kayunga. The secretary Electoral Commission was in Kayunga. Those are the principles. In Electoral Commission, I really, at times, I wonder how they climb their beds in the night and sleep. I really wonder. Like a chairman Electoral Commission carrying a title of justice. Justice is a symbol. You carry a title of justice and you preside over injustice. You preside over constitutional thuggery. You preside over shortchanging the mandate of Ugandans. It is very unfortunate.
Okay. Mr. Ochieno?
Yeah, I just want to say that it is actually generally shocking, very disappointing, and I think Sarah summarized it well, that we started the year with elections, and it was not only sham, but shambles. But leading to those elections, it was historic. 54 Ugandan citizens died in November last year. Extraordinary, historic. You wouldn't think about what happened in 1980. And I just want to keep repeating this. You couldn't relate and compare it with it in January. Then after that, a mere by-election, which now again, Sarah, helps me to put in a greater context, that because it's in Buganda and it's in Kayunga, Museveni had to give his everything in order to, quote, win, and to win by any means necessary. So it's extremely unfortunate. But then, concluding this year, then you wonder, did we waste all the billions that we are asking much earlier? That is this really necessarily worth it going through the electoral process? The answer is, but what is the alternative? I think the alternative is that as we go and have Christmas and have a few days and a few weeks before we resume, that we hope, particularly people who swear oaths of allegiance, whether in defense of our nations or those ones in the medical services, or in this case, Comrade Museveni, who claims he is full of, but locally in his home, and these alleged justices, should review their lives and their consciences of what you would say, to actually tell whether or not really they want to see next year, 2022, a year in which Ugandans are laughed at, taken for granted, die in COVID because of COVID, money begged and borrowed, but don't end up in hospital beds, and Ugandan citizens have got to continue dying seemingly to protect the interest of one man, almost seemingly now narrowing towards one family. Very difficult for me as Ochieno to say so, but seemingly is the fact. I just want to say that, look, this country is possible. Ugandans just need to believe in better. Believe in better and believe that better is possible. I know, in conclusion, that before we came on set, we're also saying again that most of our citizens are 40 and below, that 40 is the upper limit, but in terms of active in public services, and that many of them don't know that this country ever worked. I want to tell you that I'm 50 and upper. This country ever worked, hospitals ever worked, schools ever worked, railways ever worked, roads ever worked, planes ever worked. Even my Tororo, there was internal domestic flight to Tororo airstrip, meaning I could take a flight to Tororo. Those things don't exist. So they ever existed in my lifetime. So these are possible. So you, the youth of this country, let this country and this future not be taken hostage on your behalf. Pull it back and take it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Ochieno. Let's have the conclusion of Mr. Katana.
Thank you very much. My parting shots. One, the events like the ones that transpired in Kayunga should not discourage Ugandans. And in my view, they should re-energize us to be more assertive and more committed to the struggle. Because while such events temporarily manifest the dictators being in control, many times they are very deceptive. And the moment the population masters that, then the base of the dictatorship collapses, because between a dictator and the people stands one tall wall called fear. So once that wall is broken, the dictator is no more. There is a story, I think it was in Romania. There was Nicolae. He was of the Communist Party then. He would address, like, we have our Heroes Day, narrate the great things he had done and his party had done for the people of Romania, until one day, when in the public square, one of the women shouted, "Liar," and everyone else picked it up. The man was arrested by the population, and the security forces eventually joined the people. Which brings me to another concluding point, that the other great assignment we have is to tilt the balance of power. The people we have been talking about who pay allegiance to General Museveni, it's not on account of love or conviction that is the right leader for Uganda, but it is convenient to support him. And once we are able to convince these people that eventually now we are in position, then they will also shift, because for them, their loyalty is to their survival and comfort. And which also brings me to the other point of we talked about the disunity in opposition. As leaders, we have no excuse and justification for not leading the people in the direction of working together. Absolutely, no excuse. But to give it context is that this is not a unique case. In Kenya, when they were fighting the dictatorship of Moi, there were all sorts of splinter groups from opposition parties. In fact, one of them pitted the father and the son. But it did not stop the people eventually, because they kept pushing, and the dictator realized that the best thing was to negotiate his exit.
Yes.
Everywhere, in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, even if you actually looked at the civil rights movement, you had in America people fighting instead of focusing on the enemy, being distracted by small fights. So as my message to the people of Uganda is that what is important is to keep the eyes on the ball. And it doesn't matter who is even leading this onslaught, provided he's providing good leadership. And so we should do away with these petty fights, come together. But also you need to understand that sometimes these petty fights are not generated by the people. It's part of the schemes. You are having these discussions, but some of the people leading in these discussions, and I will tell you that, without mentioning names, that, for example, when towards the elections, some of the discussions about opposition unity took place in the house of a person who was subsequently appointed the minister. So with that kind of mistrust that the dictator has managed to, by progressively picking people from different groups, people don't trust each other, so working together is very hard. So people need to look beyond these small fights and focus on the main objective. And it's possible because it has happened in other countries. There is no force stronger than the people. Whether you have all the arms, you have all the guns and the money in the world, once people come together for a specific and known objective, like we have as people of Uganda, eventually the dictatorship crumbles.
Okay. Thank you very much, Katana Benjamin. We had
pleasure.
Mr. Joseph Ochieno, Sarah Bireete, and before that, we also had from the Uganda Medical Union, their Secretary General, Mr. Herbert, who was here with us.
Yes.
So thank you very much for tuning in. From Civic Space TV, we're always grateful that you tune in every week and watch these shows that run, the Youth Roundtable, the Community Show, the Citizen Chat Room, and all the shows that show. We wish you all the best. We hope that you have a Merry Christmas and a prosperous 2022. And we hope that we'll keep engaging. Hope to see you next week. I stepped in for Assessor Damian. My name is Godwin Toko, and we'll be back next week. Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.